Welcome to the party, gentlemen.
Hey, good afternoon.
We're just getting booted up here.
Hey, how's it going? Let me just give me a second to get all videoed.
Look at all your situations.
Yes.
Well, we're going to get booted up here with impromptu networking. I've got a zinger today. What advice would you give your 5-year-old self and why? So what advice, counsel, or encouragement would you offer your 5-year-old self and why that advice? So let me switch our breakouts to a more reasonable amount of time because that's intense. And get that situated. I invite you gentlemen to get into the mix. Boom. What advice would you give your 5-year-old self and why? Oh.
Hello.
Anna Marie, what's going down?
Am I the first of your arrivals?
No, everybody's already in the mix.
Oh.
We're into a flying start of impromptu networking.
Apologies for my lateness then.
No, it's all good. That's why we dreamt up this pattern. Is it allows people to just like merge automatically into the vibe. So this space is the Wise Crowds design call. So this is where we do a give and get help thing. Cool.
Cool. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I'm a little whelmed. I've got my folks here visiting for the holidays, so that's it's crowded.
Yeah.
We have an Amsterdam-sized house, right? Which is okay for 2 adults and like 2 small children. For 4 adults and 2 small children,
it's a lot.
gezellig is the Dutch word. Like very cozy and intimate. Perhaps
Nice.
a little too intimate for somebody who's been 20 years not living with their folks, but
yeah.
So for this first sort of invitation, what we're doing is we're chopping it up on what advice, counsel, or word of encouragement would you offer your 5-year-old self? And why, of course. So, yeah, that's a doozy.
Cool. So do you want it, what are we going to do that, or do I go off and do that with someone else? Or
Well, I'm the person for now until somebody else shows up. Yeah,
Okay,
it's
cool.
just you and me.
Do you have your answer to that?
I have thought about this multiple times. Like for my 5-year-old self would be like would default into some words of encouragement, like that basically boils down to some version of like it gets better.
Yeah.
Right. So it was probably when I was like 12 or 13. I came to the realization that not all change is improvement, but all improvement is generally change. And in my case, actually, it seemed like all change was improvement, actually. So I got pretty horny for like wanting to mix things up and change context and all that good stuff.
What do you know? I feel like I know what I'd offer other people's 5-year-old selves. What would I offer my own? It is what it is. I don't know. I'd literally just say, you can't fight life.
You can't fight life.
Yeah. I'm not sure that's advice. I don't know what. Maybe I'm not in the right head frame today. I'm not feeling in a very,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I might give different advice on a different day.
For sure. I think by definition, you can't fight life. So there's like I get a real feel for like this, I don't know, like willfulness. I notice, so I'm just gonna like offer that to my 5-year-old self, and my 5-year-old self is like, fuck that noise, right? Like, you can't fight life. Like, what do you think I've been doing since we started here? Like, fighting life, man.
Yeah. So I'm not sure my 5-year-old self would listen, because my 5-year-old self is very stubborn and probably thought they knew everything about everything. So
word.
Yeah.
I can dig that. Well, maybe if we like switch it up. Like, what do you think? Like, if your 5-year-old self met you on the street, like, what do you and was like doling out like life advice, as 5-year-olds do often, right? Yeah. What do you think your 5-year-old self might remind you of?
Maybe she would remind me of, I think she'd probably say, you should have kept the fringe because it was cool and you got rid of it.
The fringe.
Yeah.
You mean like the bang?
I had like a cool, like it was quite a big, it was kind of cool. It was quite big, and it's sort of like, it was slightly 70s, but kind of rocked that kind of timeless, funky Bieber vibe, and genuinely I think she just might be like, what the fuck? It was a good fringe.
Like, where what
have you done to yourself?
Like looking at herself like, so like, I grow up and like, where's my fringe? Like, what did I do wrong?
Right, exactly. Where's your spunky fringe? I think is what she'd,
Right.
What about you? What would your 5-year-old self like? It meets you.
Like, my 5-year-old self, I think my 5-year-old self would be thrilled in a lot of ways, because I've like made good on a lot of like the fantasies. Like, so one of the primary fantasies when I was a kid was to like get out of the woods and get into civilization. So like, here I am living not only in an international city, but an international city on a different continent. It's like, whoa, like, you're having a real adventure.
That's cool.
But I think, I think if my 5-year-old self would remind me of anything, it would actually be to like tighten up with my friends. So when I was growing up, I had like a real tight friend group in like the neighborhood, and so like from sunrise to sunset all summer long, we were just out causing trouble and shit. And so I think in that way, I'm a lot more in between contexts than I am like really, really like crazy deep in with one set of people.
Do you watch Stranger Things at all?
Yeah.
Is that when I imagine what you're talking about, is that like bond of deep like brotherhood, sisterhood?
Totally. Those are the bros. Well, welcome back, gentlemen.
Hey, welcome.
this is the crew for today's edition of the Wise Crowds Design Call. I'm gonna remix this thing one more time, and Aaron, if you want to hang out with me,
Sure.
so ignore the prompt, and
Yep.
one more time, if your 5-year-old self were to offer you one piece, or you were to offer a piece of advice, encouragement, or counsel to your 5-year-old self, oh, this got real interesting real quick. What would that be? On your mark, set. There's some invitation. And Anna Marie, let me add you to the mix. Open rooms, that's what I'm missing. And let's get Maru in here. Maru, so Anna Marie, you should get an invitation into room 1 to go chop it up with Robert. Maru, welcome to the party.
Hey, what's up, man?
Oh,
We,
Aaron.
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, I knew you were talking about LS and stuff, but I would never have thought, Jeremy and you actually.
Oh yeah,
would
no,
attend
I've known Jeremy for a couple of years now, right?
Yeah, for real.
since 2020, since the COVID.
Yes, it's the
like-
COVID. Yeah, that's like I'd say probably summer, maybe June, something like that, 2020.
Yeah.
That's when I saw him too, but he was not here at this call. He was in the Liberators. He was facilitating some Liberator meetings.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
And
then
then-
he started his thing, and then I
Yeah.
kind of did that also. So I did both, and we got connected because he's from Seattle, and we were talking. At one point we were talking shit about football or whatever, and so it was sort
Guy
of
time.
yeah.
So
So-
how does it feel, Jeremy, that two guys are talking about you, but you're actually there listening to them?
Yeah, I know,
Yeah,
man.
it's
It's
funny.
crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So
You have a
we're
brand.
into-
That means you're like a Kardashian
Oh,
of
God.
Amsterdam LS market.
Yeah, there we go. I'm the
So
Kim
like
Kardashian of
you
the
could sell
liberating
your
sector space.
your beauty products right now into the deep LS Amsterdam market, the deep Amsterdam LS market.
Word. Hey, Sam and Maru. So we're a couple minutes deep into this impromptu networking prompt, and that is, if you had to give one piece of advice, counsel, or like encouragement to your 5-year-old self, what would that be?
5-year-old.
What's that?
5-year-old self?
5-year-old self. Yeah. If you had to give one piece of advice, counsel, or encouragement to your 5-year-old self, what would that be? Maru and Sam, I'm going to invite you guys into room 2. You've only got a couple minutes, but chop it up. Get to know each other.
All right. I get it. Okay.
And what about you, Aaron? What advice, counsel, or encouragement would you offer your 5-year-old self?
I would say have more fun, I guess would be the one.
I can totally imagine you as like a super serious kid too.
Well, yeah, because so my parents were creatives, right? So my dad was a professional musician, jazz and classical. My mom was a chef. And so it was just chaos, right? I mean, they were just, this was the 70s. I mean, it was just so, like you often, not always, but you often swing the other way.
Right. You were like the Michael J. Fox Family Ties young Republican. Like,
no, I wasn't like that so much, but it was much more, I would say, I mean, in some ways it was organized, like seeking organization is really the simple way. So I joined lots of sports, lots of clubs, and like if you remember boys clubs and stuff like that.
Right.
And the Y and scouts and just like lots of that stuff, really, right? Because it was just sort of like that that attained an organization within the disorganization of their lives, which
Sure.
was, you know, focused on themselves, right? Especially LA, 1970s, like you can imagine.
Right.
You know, and
Exactly.
and by the 80s,
at the height of the boomeritis, right? Mhm.
no, because this is sort of before, right? This is the sort of LA chaos, you know, like serial murderers and the post 60s, 70s kind of free love era, you know, it's just like sketchy everywhere, every direction, which was creative if you're an adult, but not if you're like 7.
Right.
And so, it's like I can remember with my friends just riding to Dodger Stadium, which was a couple miles from where I grew up,
Mhm.
during the week, 7 o'clock at night, on bikes, and just like riding back at 10, 11 o'clock at night. It's like probably not what you want 7, 8, 9-year-olds doing.
Right. I doubt my wife would go for that.
Yeah, or anyone else, right? And
Yeah.
so oh, there's my boss. He just came in. Good.
There we go. So the circle is growing.
Good.
So by now, I think we kind of get the idea. So we're in this impromptu networking thing. What we're going to do is one final round of the same invitation. What advice, counsel, or encouragement would you offer your 5-year-old self? And let's see, let me mix.
Just don't put me in with my boss. Don't
with
put me
George.
in with Jorge.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, with
Jorge
George,
would
exactly.
be, we might get
That's
real.
boring. Yeah. Well, it's also just like we talk to each other every day. So,
Yeah, exactly.
it's like.
Sure. So let's mix it up. There we go. That should do the trick. All right, on your mark, set, race. And Jorge, I'm going to invite you into room 3. And again, just what advice, counsel, or encouragement would you offer your 5-year-old self? Oh, okay. All right, Sam, I'll jump into the mix on your behalf. Boom. So what comes up for you, Robert?
Yeah, so I think I might have told you this on the previous one, but I'm not sure. But I would say to my younger self, be more courageous.
Yeah, the courage aspect, right?
When you feel it's time to leave, leave. And don't
right.
wait.
Do you have a sense for what your 5-year-old self would tell you?
My 5-year-old, that would be interesting. My 5-year-old will be living in the US at that point, I think. Yeah, 5-year-old will be living in the US. So we'll be busy with all sorts of very interesting and new stuff to explore. I was talking to Anne-Marie about that. I wonder if 5-year-olds have the cognitive abilities to really understand what we say. That's maybe a different matter, but
No doubt.
Yeah, I don't think he would have to say much. He'll be interested in all the new stuff.
Yeah.
Just about. Yeah.
It's funny when you bring up call into question the cognitive abilities of 5-year-olds. And I noticed it's like my son is like shockingly so like present and like on top of things, like super observant, and like his observations are surprising to me. I don't get the feeling. It's funny. The question is kind of weird when I think about him, because he doesn't have a whole lot of like interest in the notion of advice, right? On one hand, like he's rarely interested in advice, except for the narrow band of like, how do I do X thing that I'm struggling with? And I definitely don't see the like a drive or desire in him. Well, except for when I do things wrong. When I do things wrong, he's very self-aware of like, Papa,
Yeah.
you shouldn't have tried to do that while you were riding the bike or something like that. Right?
Yeah. That's interesting because I actually doing a part of my psychology degree is doing this course in developmental psychology.
Right.
So this is all part of that. What children in certain stages of their life can do. And I think although I don't know how old your son is, but at this very young age, they're very egocentric also. It's really all focused on them.
Sure.
And it's not that they don't know you're there, but you're just not much of a factor into their thinking, what you want and what you need. And that comes a bit later, that social aspect of it.
Totally. I negotiated a discussion today when my son was trying to like muscle his younger sister out of her chair. And so I was like, hey, and they were like, Dad, like Lumen is pushing me. Dad, Isaiah's pushing me. I was like, well, have you asked Lumen for what you want? It's like, oh yeah. Well, Lumen scoot over. It's like, no. I'm like, oh, well, it seems like she doesn't want you to sit in her chair. And he's like you can see him like, yeah, but that's really inconvenient, right?
I don't want that.
Yeah, kind of the primary thought is less like what it's like for her, but it's more like, no, that's contrary to my will.
Yeah, that sense of sharing and taking other people's wishes into consideration that only develops a bit later in life, like I think 6-7 years old or something like that, roughly. Kids are different, of course. Everyone is different, but somewhat
sure.
there.
As everybody knows, my kids are awesome. So
that's everybody's kids are awesome. Like everybody's.
Yep. I'm here. I'm awake. Okay, gang. Well, this is the squad for today's July 25th edition of the Wise Crowd Design Call. Let me throw the link to the doc here in yonder chat, and so that you can, in addition, see what is going on. So, like I always do at this time, I want to invite everybody to, regardless of sort of where you are in your like liberating structures learning journey, there's an important membership role that you can take up to help us have an awesome conversation. No worries. Thanks, Mario. We've got you. So even if you're very, very new to liberating structures, you find yourself in this despairing cynic development phase, you can help us out by challenging our assumptions and asking like why questions, especially that might reveal blind spots that I certainly have. For those cautious optimists in the house, familiar with ±5 structures, help us make sure that we keep the group together by asking for clarification or explanation, so that if we get caught up in our jargony jargon, that you can point that stuff out to us and we can unpack the stuff that we sort of gloss by. That way we can keep everybody sort of in the loop. And for rapturous super users, if you're familiar with ±half of the Liberating Structures toolkit, it would be super awesome if you could help answer questions that you may not feel completely confident with your answer. Just get in some reps and help bring in new voices and explanations and metaphors into the space, so that it's just not me talking the whole damn time. And this is a super warm room. We're all here to practice. We're all practitioners at the end of the day. So let it rip. And for Maestro Minimalists, those of us familiar with ± all of the Liberating Structures toolkit, we can take up a helpful membership role by making space for the input of others and then building on their input based on our experience. So if we all take up one or more of those membership roles, we'll have a hyper productive call and learn a whole shit ton. And in this document as well is a guest book. Please feel free to sign that guest book so I can pump some NFTs for participation into your metaphorical or literal wallets. And we can help keep track of who was there from the beginning when this thing all got started, perhaps in the future. So today we're going to go through the pattern that is wise crowds. Wise crowds rhymes a lot with Troika Consulting, if you're familiar with that one. One person is going to take on the role of client, and the rest of us are going to play consultant. The client's going to present their challenge, their help request, their meeting or session that they're trying to design particularly. And the consultants are then going to take a couple minutes to ask clarifying questions. After the consultants have asked clarifying questions and very importantly have not offered advice in that clarifying round, I'll help us be honest with that. The client will then turn off their webcam and microphone, and the consultants will have a conversation about the client's situation. The client will importantly listen and sort of take notes to that conversation. And then after a few minutes, the client will come back and turn on their webcam and mic and tell us what they thought of our recommendation and advice. And then we will move on to the next. So does anybody have questions with the procedure that we're going to go ahead and do today? The nuts and bolts of wise crowds. Righteous, then we're clear. So I'm going to turn this guy off. And who's got a design brief for us to work on today? Oh, not all at once, everybody.
So we have only consultants and no clients today.
Yeah, this is a new one. We've been doing this for almost a half year now, and this is the first one. So, well, we can do something different. But we do have a lot of brain power in this particular call. Maybe that's the thing, huh?
I don't know, Aaron, maybe we can improvise something. We have so many issues to solve.
Yeah, I know.
But we were not prepared with the design brief, right? But from the big challenges you have seen in terms of organizational redesign or top leadership intervention, I don't know how we could do that, right? But, or just
Well,
in the
so I
scale.
think, yeah, I think maybe one we could do that is common enough is how to encourage leaders to be more open or free to something like liberating structures in their participation. How can they, in essence, how can they be a little more vulnerable, right? Because I think in the end, to make liberating structures semi-successful, you have to be willing to expose some vulnerability, right? It's because if you keep everything close to your vest, you're really not sharing. You're not contributing to the fluidness of the environment that you need to so all the ideas and all the emotions can flow, effectively. So, and that is a challenge that George and I have consistently. Is people are very I don't even know if the right word is conservative. I think it's careful might be a better word. people just get very careful, not to, define something that's obviously a challenge as much of a challenge, because I think they get a lot of their identity from having, especially executives, from having, all that under control. So I don't know if we can define a brief out of that. I don't know what you think, Jeremy, or other super LSers.
That's what we've got. So I'll just get out of the way and open up this space for clarifying questions.
Okay.
We'll see where we go.
Perfect. So you're going to ask them to George or me? Which one do you want to? You can probably do it to George because he's been at the company longer. So.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so thanks for the quick brief. Just to maybe clarify, so when you're talking about senior leadership participating in debating structures, so they kind of participate in meetings now, I guess, or that's an assumption I have, so please validate that if not. But how do they present themselves in those meetings at this moment? How does that work?
Well, the team, our leadership team has been in place for many years.
Mm-hmm.
We had very little turnover at that level. So they know each other very well. We have most of our meetings are virtual using Microsoft Teams.
Mm-hmm.
There's usually an agenda, but not always. But typically 1 or 2, 3 topics of discussion at that level when they meet. And what I've noticed, and we have a very disciplined approach on people raising their hands and go one by one. So they have learned to respect each other in terms of one person talking at a time, and then the next person, and then the next person. People elaborate their topics, their responses, whatever they're exposing. And what I notice is that sometimes it takes a long time for all of them to voice their opinion. So by the time there's decision making, there's little time, because I mean, it's a lot of people and very sequential approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, I get what you mean there. So it's good that there is respect, but it takes a long time. Yeah.
How many people are we talking participating in these calls?
It could be between maybe 12 to 20. The industry directors, or the vertical managing directors is 10 people. So sometimes they only meet by themselves. And also there's the direct reports to our chairman and CEO. So that would be maybe probably 6 or 7 additional people. So when everybody meets, probably again it's between 18, 20 people. The CEO, the CFO, the CSO, the CMO, all of those, plus the 10 managing directors of the 10 industries. So there could be other meetings with not everybody involved, right? So it could be 5 to 7 if it's only the non-managing directors group.
So what would you like to achieve with introducing liberating structures? We probably already talked a little bit about time aspect, but is there more?
Well, they're probably again more efficient way to move forward. In general, we have the tendency in the company, not only in the top leadership, but we have the tendency of discussing topics for a long time, and decisions take months and months to be done. Aaron and I are trying to, in the mid-level of the company or the areas where we interact, trying to do some things different, again, from the mid-level or from the bottom up. But we have not dared to trying with the upper management, right? So we were trying and we're learning on our level, but yeah, the question is, okay, how should we or when should we try to introduce this to the upper levels of the organization.
Do they recognize that as a problem themselves?
I think so. Yeah, I think because usually there's frustration, and I think there's been a realization that it is what it is, and that we are like this, and maybe some resignation that maybe this is not something we could change. But of course, it can be changed, but probably they don't know how.
Okay. Thank you.
So let me just see if I can recap and if that feels like a good summarization. So it sounds like we are in an organizational context where there's been some, sort of bottom-up experimentation with different patterns, different structures, and the sort of introduction of a new, somewhat of a new culture and in alignment with that. But at the sort of top of the organization, there is what sounds like to be a functional process that sort of is in place, and a sense of sort of resignation that that's how it is, and that in some of these larger meetings that can lead to longer discussions and longer lead times to decision making. And when I think about I guess I have some squishiness around the sort of purpose or outcomes. I can understand the broader purpose or outcome for organizational change and to try and get a new vibe. But when I think about the calls that are the topics that are on these agendas specifically, what type of purposes or outcomes are happening within these calls themselves that we're talking about?
Well, it could be little things and larger things, right? So we are about to launch our annual cycle of sales and strategy planning for the next year. And one thing, for example, that is very hard to achieve is some alignment of what is the strategy for the whole company, right? Different players have different visions and different ideas of what to do in their space. So again, maybe there will be some attempt to try to get to an aligned strategy, but after weeks and weeks or sometimes months, probably we will stay with the status quo, which is no clear single strategic alignment, right? So the company is very decentralized in that way, but sometimes you need to have some kind of alignment, right? So that we are all pulling in the same direction. So that would be one example of company strategy that would need to be defined and then later communicated to the organization.
Okay, and another question that sort of jumps out to me in terms of this sort of call length, if we're talking about big topics like this with a large group of people, how often do these groups meet, and how long are we in sort of focused communication with one another?
Not completely sure of all of their meetings. I know there's like the 10 managing directors, they meet, I think, at least twice a month, or could be 1 hour or 1 hour and a half to talk about different subjects and stay in touch with each other. Of course, there's monthly review meetings with the corporate leadership, there's quarterly review meetings. But in terms of resolving specific topics, the other approach that we've been trying is for certain longer term objectives or projects. There's been like committees, so maybe three people from the leadership team are tasked to resolve one issue or to define a way forward for one specific problem we want to solve, and then they need to present their findings or their results, their conclusions to the rest of the team. So in those cases, they might meet a little bit more frequently, but again, everybody's agendas are very busy, so they don't have a lot of time, which again is, they need to learn, we need to help them learn to be more efficient, because otherwise, again, things take months and months.
Okay, well, does anybody else have clarifying questions? Cool, then I guess we will invite George. Aaron, do you want to fuck off too, or do you want to?
Yeah, I think so, just because I work there, so it's sort of like weird. It's no, I'm negative value add if I'm with you guys.
No worries. Awesome. So if you guys just want to mute yourselves, turn off your webcam,
Yeah.
we'll chop it up and see what we come
Sure.
up with.
Okay.
So these are always interesting, these sort of vaguer, squishier sort of help requests in context. But I think there's a lot of sort of the greatest hits of in the environment. What comes up for you guys, especially in terms of like patterns and tooling, like specific interventions, structures that we could offer these guys, like, hey, try that out.
And I'm not sure about anything LS specific, but what was coming up for me was around, I guess, there was a lot around pull as opposed to push, and change happening through pull, through people's kind of interest getting twerked, like, oh, look at the way that this department or this area is doing something differently. It's working incredibly well for them. Everyone seems more energized. Their things are happening more efficiently. I want that, as opposed to like being told you should have this. And so I wondered, I guess I was wondering is like how obvious or vocal or are they being in sharing about these experiments they're running and perhaps even the positive results of these. And I wondered if there could be something really interesting about tracking actual positive results in a way through feedback and so almost like statistics or some kind of information that could then be shared that said like, hey, like we actually have this information, and people be like, that's really interesting. Your decisions are getting made in less time. You're managing to get through this many decisions in, and therefore that pull desire being created.
Awesome. I definitely love this aspect of storytelling. A particular pattern that might help out with that is one called Discovery Action Dialog. Discovery Action Dialog is basically splits people into smaller groups, or usually around 4, 5, 6. One person sort of plays the role of host and leads the group's discussion through 6 or 7 questions. And those 6 or 7 questions are basically a search for positive deviance. So basically, hey, who do we know that is successfully grappling with whatever challenge is in front of us? And what might we learn from their approach that we can import into this context? So it might encourage us to look for those examples of people trying stuff out, and then stimulate some curiosity to go look for that stuff. Anybody else?
Yeah, I was kind of tackling on to what Anne-Marie said about making some things transparent. It's not really liberating structures, but I do think it might help the management team here. And that was something I heard, I think it was Joanna Rothman that said that she's a management consultant. And she simply measured cycle time on decisions. So when do we start discussing a decision, and when do we have made a decision, and how long does that take? And just making these things transparent can trigger indeed some thinking. Okay, guys, we're taking like 3 months to make a decision here. Is that what we want? And that could, and that also comes back to what Anne-Marie said, the push and pull. People need to understand there is a problem before you can change something. I mean, if people don't have a feeling that there is an issue, then there is not a lot you can do on that, other than try to make transparent what the issue is. And I think they could help with that aspect of it to really show, okay, there is something we can improve here. And then indeed something like a Discovery Action Dialog can come in to see, okay, what kind of things, what's happening around us, what's happening in the organization that could help us, or what's happening outside of the organization that can help us. So that could help them indeed. But it starts, I'm always very careful with trying to trigger change from the outside of groups or organizations, because if there is no clear desire to do so. So I think you need to make sure that that's there, and if it's not there, you need to generate it. But that's kind of where I am with this. So I probably would not jump into a liberating structures mode immediately here. It's my gut feeling. I don't know what you think.
Well, there's two. To like pivot in a totally different direction, I might just jump into two different structures in order to create that sense. So one that's a bit bigger is EcoCycle Planning. So to just invite the group to map the portfolio of their activities onto this EcoCycle, from what activities are sort of in gestation or regeneration and the sort of idea or seed phase, and what activities are more towards birthing actual initiative, and what activities are more associated with actual value generation, what activities are more associated with creative destruction or sort of composting, and then looking for where the flow of those activities is sort of bound and stuck in both scarcity traps. So the flow from idea into birthing into action is maybe not happening the way we would like it to. And what are the ideas that are sort of long in the tooth, or the initiatives and efforts? What activities are not moving from maturity into that composting phase of creative destruction? So that we might be able to get awareness of these things are not flowing. What could we do about those? Another pattern that might be able to build some awareness of what we might want to poke around and change is TRIZ, right? To actively invite folks to brainstorm, how we would create the worst possible scenarios or outcomes in our context. And then which of those activities that we already recognize leads to bad outcomes are we actively participating in? And another one that seems also in line with this building awareness is generative relationships, or STAR. So generative relationships is a sort of micro team health check. So just based on four metrics of sort of separateness or diversity. So how much sort of cognitive and diversity do we have on the team? How much tuning, how well do we communicate basically and integrate information? How well do we act in alignment and in actually getting shit done? And how clear is our purpose amongst us? So just rating those four different questions or areas on a scale of 1 to 5 can already give us a micro artifact that might be able to reveal that, maybe we recognize that there's something that's not particularly awesome here. Or maybe we might realize that, we have a big spread of differences of opinions. So what might that tell us in order to give us some surface area to sense into a larger conversation? So those are some patterns I might think to stimulate this, how are things doing sort of perspective around here. Anybody else?
So what were those 4 questions you talked about, Jeremy? What's the name of the framework?
The structure is Generative Relationships, or STAR, STAR. I'll put a visual in the design board doc.
All right, I'll check it out. There is a visual. Thank you. But from my perspective, what I was hearing was, first of all, for me, from my perspective, the need for identifying the individual profiles of the individual stakeholders, because they will probably, like any enterprise coordination, not all be involved in all, let's say, contexts where there is a need for coordination and communication, where we could think of using particular dedicated LSs. And I wonder which structure would be fitting for achieving such visibility. And of these stakeholders and inside the group of stakeholders, which are the circles inside the broader group of stakeholders that need coordination, and what kind of coordination, what kind of communication. And then we can think as a group about which structures can help, maybe depending on the type of coordination needed. So what I was hearing was a general lack of alignment and undertone of slow decision making. That was said explicitly, but I wonder if these stakeholders and the individual coordination circles are understood. That would be already something very helpful. So that's what I have heard. Kind of joins a little bit with the EcoCycle planning you mentioned from a certain perspective.
And another sort of answering that question, social network webbing might be another one to make explicit sort of what the relationships are between the folks in the call and maybe in the larger context. So think about a more messy, more intuitive org chart that actually makes explicit who people are communicating with. And then using that as a sense-making tool, again, to create an artifact that might give us some idea of like, oh, well, these people and these people don't really have any direct line of communication. And that might be an area that we would want to invest or stimulate.
So yeah, so the reason why I mentioned that particular perspective is because I do quite some organizational strategy work and flow strategic portfolio and strategic coordination work. I use different methods such as flight levels, for example. And one of the common themes is that when you hear people talking, when you start trying to build mechanisms for coordination and organization of an alignment of strategy, what they actually discover they need is just understand who is involved in which type of decision making before we start measuring right and left, which usually is not very productive. That's why I mentioned that. So this social network analysis, I didn't know this social network webbing structure, but I never heard of it. Maybe we did. I don't know. But this sounds like something useful here. Just the goal, the challenge that I was looking at here is identifying which circles are needed, which type of coordination, because usually those coordination needs are not always exactly the same, which leads to more confusion. And when we try to build a system that's fitting for everything, and we say let's align. Alignment is a word that I hate because it means nothing. It literally means nothing. It's a spectrum from 0 to 100%. You don't know who's aligning with whom. Is it a consent? Is it a consent? Is it something in the middle? Is it some driving, aligning against what? I don't know. But this is the kind of mechanism that makes that a bit more visible, because it forces you to discuss what kind of coordination are we looking for here? For what purpose? Who's involved? So we discovered, for example, there is a circle of 5 decision makers from 4 product teams, or 2 product teams and 1 and 3 operations teams and stuff. These will need this type of coordination. And then we can think of the individual structures we would need. So again, I don't know the EcoCycle planning very well. I have never used it. I wonder if this could be something, because that one mentioned it very early, EcoCycle planning. I wonder if this structure could help achieve such visibility.
It might, though. Listening to your description, a different structure jumps out to me as perhaps very interesting, and that's critical uncertainties. So critical uncertainties is like a micro version of scenario planning. So the first thing you would do is think about, whatever it is, alignment or coordination. Let's just take alignment because that's the factor that George brought in. So, what is the most critical factor when it comes to alignment, and what is the most uncertain factor when it comes to alignment? And then we take these 2 different factors. Let's just, anybody got any ideas? What might be critical when it comes to alignment or coordination?
Mm.
Mhm.
So let's say clarity of outcome jumps out to me, right? So if we put that on the x-axis, we would say clarity of outcomes is sketchy, clarity of outcomes is good, right? We have hot and cold clarity of outcomes. And if we might say, but what's the most uncertain when it comes to alignment or coordination?
And then map who is involved on this two-dimensional matrix.
Yeah, there we go. So who's involved? That might be something that's uncertain at the outset of coordinating and alignment. So
yeah, I like this.
So if we just say who's involved is again a hot and cold version. If who's involved is well defined, or who's involved is poorly defined, this now gives us 4 different quadrants, right? We have involvement, and I don't even remember what the fuck I said 30 seconds ago.
Clarity of outcome.
Outcome, exactly. So we have like a heaven situation where we have clear outcomes and well-defined participation. We have a hell where we have both unclear outcomes and poorly defined participation. And then we've got poorly defined
outcomes
and well-defined participation, and well-defined outcomes but poorly defined participation. So that first move is just creating this matrix, and this already will help sort of create an interesting frame. The second move then becomes the description. So the way I tend to describe it is, say I get dropped out of a helicopter into a random context. What might I see, hear, and notice that lets me know I'm in one quadrant versus another quadrant? So let's just sort of fill out our narrative of the scenario itself and what is it like to be in that context. And then what's really nice as well is to add some like very short explainer, like a short buzzword. So think like song title, movie title, some meme that you can associate with that quadrant so that you can compress a lot of information about the quadrant into a very digestible, like one-liner or something. So once we've got the definition of all quadrants done, and you can split into different groups. One group handles one quadrant, other group handles the other quadrant. The next move would be, okay, if I am in this situation, what are my coping strategies? And coping strategies are different than interventions, but coping strategies are much like, this is the world in which I live. What are the things I'm going to do that are just going to keep me from dying? And come up with some particular coping strategies for the quadrant that your group is in or has been assigned for the sake of the exercise. And then we come back together and we go, hey, this was our quadrant. This is what we called it. This is what we knew about it. And these were the coping strategies that we came up with. And then what you'll notice is you can do some sense making on the coping strategies across all quadrants. You'll notice that some coping strategies pop up in a lot of different quadrants. We call those resilient strategies. And then we see other strategies that are very specific to a particular scenario. And those are more hedging strategies. You might never use it outside of that situation, but if you are in that situation, it may just save your life. And so critical uncertainties seems like an interesting sort of exercise to do some heavyweight sense making around the landscape of alignment or coordination, whatever the sticky widget is. And that was a lot of me talking.
Did I interrupt you? No. So the reason why I like this one is that it allows you to not have to deal with the whole system at once, all the need for coordination is. And also another idea that I had listening to this is we could use a pre-step before identifying what coping strategies versus interventions people can use. You mentioned more, you talked about coping strategies. One intermediary step one could do before, just to show the pain or to investigate what existing pains come from the previous attempts of the organization of the system to deal with this is asking or collecting what are the existing coping strategies that people have come up with. They must have come up with something, because otherwise, you know, they would at least have been talking about something. They must have been doing something, and map that also on a visual, on a matrix, to show them where they are, what they're really doing. So we need less effort in the conversation about what should we do next. When you show that intermediary step, show them where they are, what they're doing by asking them. That's why consultants are always in a bad situation, because they tell me, yeah, but you just ask us stuff and then you show it to us. Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm here. Otherwise you wouldn't have needed me. But yeah, I'm doing you a favor by first asking you what you're doing, instead of parachuting some magic structures on top of your head. And then elaborate those coping strategies. But yeah, another question would be, depending on the type of coping strategy we identify, which structures would be fitting. Yeah, we would have to work on this particular case with the client to see which particular structures would be useful, depending on the type.
Yeah. So there's a nice sort of coming full circle, because I feel like that first intermediary step is kind of akin to the discovery action dialogue. That's kind of what we're getting at. So what are the existing strategies that are being used in that type of scenario? And what structures might be appropriate? The selection matchmaker might be a really interesting tool. If you've never seen that, the selection matchmaker just takes all 33 structures. I'll put a link into the doc as well. It just takes all 33 structures and just says a super simple one-liner description, like have people, well, shit, let me not guess. I've got it right here. So it just says a brief description of the individual structure, and it just invites people to go, hey, circle all of the descriptions that you think might be helpful for your situation, and then sort of shortlist that down to 2 or 3 structures that you might want to try and use as actual interventions. So, for example, 6 here is engage everyone simultaneously in generating questions, ideas, suggestions. Like, you know, based on your scenario, does that seem like a pretty rational thing? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. 24, move from either or to robust both and solutions. That might be a pretty good strategy in some situations. So I'll put a visual to the doc and a link to it again in the design storyboard. But we've offered a lot of tooling. Is there anything else that is sort of top of mind that wants to come into the space, or should we invite Aaron and George back? All right, Aaron. All right, George, come on back and tell us what may have been particularly helpful or not.
Yeah. No, this was great. George, you're coming back in here? I think there you
Yes, I'm here. Go ahead, Aaron.
Cool.
You go first.
Yeah, so I mean, I want to start off with what Anna Maria pointed out on the push-pull. I think that was spot on. I mean, I think that's, especially because George and I have a strong Lean Six sort of, you know, background, and, you know, and we are always sort of overlaying that into places. But it's easy to forget, right? You get trapped in sort of the weeds, and you forget some of the, you know, the basics, the push-pull dynamics. So, and George has this great book club that he runs. So they'll go through the goal, they'll go through all those types of books, you know, on terms of, you know, how to think differently about these challenges. So that's the first one. Critical uncertainties is great. It's funny, I've been doing the last couple of weeks, I want to say, yeah, with the different groups that we're working with, I'm starting to use TRIZ more. And my goal, secretly, I didn't even tell George, was to go from TRIZ to critical uncertainties. So the fact that, you know, you all highlighted that, I think is really, really good. And then I think the alignment, you know, I think Amaru nailed the whole alignment sort of is a worthless word. I've always felt that way. It's just like a spectrum word. It's like, hey, let's go there. You know, there doesn't where. You know, where specifically? What's the address? And so really focusing on sort of the group network dynamics in decision making. I think he really sort of nailed that one, because I think that's great. And I could kind of see the way you guys were building a string here, you know, or how you're sort of constructing a string. So those are my notes that I have. I don't know, George, yours.
Yeah, very, very similar observations. And I think, Robert, you were saying it's difficult or sometimes impossible to help a team that doesn't want to help, right? Or if they don't recognize that they need the help, right? So that definitely might be. I think they may feel that they're not an efficient group in decision making. They may not realize exactly why or how. Again, there may be different degrees of self-awareness in the groups, right? So helping them realize that kind of a flanking strategy or not confronting them directly is a good approach, or getting those statistics, those metrics, something that makes it very clear, hey, we have a problem, and then it might be easier to introduce any solutions. I forgot to mention in the introduction that, I mean, there's a change management organization or somebody that is helping them with some of these things. One of the things we need to do, Aaron, is definitely talk with him and see. He may have additional insight that we don't know what they're trying or what level of awareness they have. But yeah, I also liked a lot the EcoCycle planning suggestions, Jeremy. It's probably a little too advanced, but maybe there's a way to introduce to them like what things they're doing in each of the 4 different areas. So especially, there's a lot of things that I think that we have been doing the same way for many, many years, probably even decades, that maybe they are ready for some creative destruction or some evolution. So that, but again, how or when to introduce these concepts to them, we will need to see how to do it in a gentle way. Yeah, but all of the suggestions were great. Yeah, thank you guys.
There's something that is sort of sticking for me in this question about like how and when. So this dude Forrest Landry, he talks about his eminent metaphysics and his ephemeral group process. I'm going to try and summarize it because those are big ass words. But moving from this question of how/when and into the question of what context makes that happen automatically, and from this idea of what context makes that happen automatically to what does that feel like actually. So, you know, what does that context feel like where this how and when just self-organizes itself? And if we can land on what does it feel like to be in that space and just move directly towards that feeling, that might induce us to answer all those questions.
So let me ask you this. So creating if it's possible, given the circumstances, sort of an experience of that as like a simulation, and then working backwards to the mechanics versus this clearly, you know, whatever 250-year approach, which is from the heuristic mechanics forward, and then somehow hoping we discover experience basically, and then something happens when that happens, instead of in some ways almost attempting to apply some categorization around the experience, right? Instead of letting it just be purely ephemeral or purely just open, but actually being able to say, all right, this is what it looks like when your annual strategic plan would align, you know, and this is where and the budgets would be spent right, and you know, so that would be an example of maybe, you know, hey, let's live with that obviously simplifying, but let's live with that experience for a meeting for 30 minutes and make decisions now. And then how do you guys feel about that? How do all of you feel about that? And then sort of maybe reverse back to why, how do you get to that? Does that sort of summarize it like at an example level, like in a real world context, or no?
Yeah,
did I miss something there?
I mean, I think that it's on the right direction. Thanks, Anne-Marie. It's on the right direction. Like what we're trying to do ultimately is like create a vibe, a feeling about where that just provides optimal context for that thing that we're looking to have happen to happen, like to set the party where, for lack of a better metaphor, like it's not going to work if I'm just thinking about how do I get into her pants, right? But if I can think about creating an atmosphere where that happens, well, suddenly I'm in a much freer state than if I'm focused on the particularities of the outcome, right? If I'm tending to the whole environment where whatever the outcome is just pretty probable, right?
Yeah. So like as an example, if I was a teacher and my choice is to highly instrumentalize each kid, Johnny, Maria, whatever, like learn this next problem, learn this next piece of reading comprehension, versus constructing, in essence, just an open, healthier learning environment that within the context that is manageable, obviously, because that's the key, right? It can't be free range, because then it's chaos. People don't tend to want that very long, right? They'll seek order pretty quickly. So it has to have a balance of enough progressive order to it that it doesn't feel like it's like a racing condition is going on. But ultimately, if your goal is to have that more open learning environment, then people are going to be more comfortable exposing their vulnerability and their need, and ideally it's more effective to have individual students ask for help than for you to drop a hammer on them, each individual kid at a time, and because then they're just waiting to fall under siege every day, and which isn't optimal learning anyways. But then you're also, cycle time is not very good either, like if we're being very honest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're sort of, it's basically the kids are a bunch of interrupts at that point. It's like very event driven, very sequential, versus they're coming in amorphously for help. And then at a certain point you see it's like cluster analysis takes over. Oh, wow, I'm realizing this isn't these individual kids' problems or challenges. It's a whole bunch of kids struggling learning this concept. So that means however it was exposed it wasn't effective. So now we go back through that, and so you kind of depersonalize it, I think, at a certain level. So using that example, would that be sort of what you mean by broadening it out?
Yeah, I think what you're sort of coming towards is like, okay, so if I recognize that this challenge is not specific, so it's less of a question of how do I address this challenge, but how do I set the context where that challenge addresses itself, really?
Yeah.
And what does it feel like for me to be in that context where that challenge addresses itself? And then I use that sensation and what the experience is like as the basics of my design brief, right?
Yeah.
So that I'm no longer thinking about the instrumentality of first this, that, and that step, but I'm actually thinking about, no, let's zoom way back. How do I set up an environment that's just super supportive of that thing solving itself? And then then I have the maximum probability that somebody sort of discovers something that I don't know here and now, that they're able to upregulate to the group. And sort of as you were describing, as we're sort of talking about learning as a specific example, this quote from The Little Prince is just fucking the best, right? If you want to build a ship, don't drum up men and women to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea, right? So like this is very different. That
Yeah,
really
yeah, yeah,
goes
yeah.
towards that design brief of give them this, encourage the sensation, and they will self-organize to build ships and
Yeah.
rafts and all different types of submarines and hot air balloons and shit, right?
So I mean, bringing it back to us, one of the things that and this is something George and I have talked about over time is how do we take a small part of the problem and in some ways almost showcase it to the leaders that we can take a more bottom-up approach, maybe not all the way from the bottom, but let's say when you deal with executive challenges, the bottom tends to be the mid-level in the organization, right? Because that's the first layer that sees those problems more macro, because they're getting the push and pull of the executives to, give me the latest numbers, what's this, what's that. So that could be an approach that we take, is take something really small that they have clearly struggled with for however long, years, or it's highly recursive. It's the same thing over and over. And then how from the bottom up, relative to what we mean by the bottom, the mid-level, have we been able in a short period of time, 8 meetings, doing a blend of LS and other things, come up with basically a design brief, and then you can compare and contrast and just see what the feedback is from that. Because that's something I think that in some ways that's what George and I are sort of indirectly doing, because we've been doing LS here since last fall, basically. So we have an innovation group. We're extending it to a sales team or sales sort of strategy planning team now. Sort of dropping it in here and there when it comes to various product teams that I work with. So we're prototyping it, but prototyping it with a pretty robust, intelligent mid-level group. I would say a chunk of the organization's kind of sub-stars, a head of innovation, one of them, and some of his team. So it's not that it's being tested in some corner of nowhere. So now we're at that point where if we're going to consider it, if we're going to be comfortable extending it, how would we extend it institutionally? And that's what we've been talking about now. I don't know, George, if you want to add to that or anything else or other ideas you have?
No, nothing specific. I think we need to compare our notes, Aaron, again, talk with the change management leader. It's an immediate next step that we need to take. But yeah, all of these suggestions were good. And now we're going to need to choose. Again, I think the suggestion of creating that desire to change, to understand what is the different outcome. The exercise in terms of creating that quadrant matrix also sounds very, very interesting. So if they build it themselves, again, that might be a way to help them see, okay, what's not working, what are those patterns on each of the quadrants. So again, great recommendations. We need to choose how to start, but now we have good ideas on where to choose from.
Yeah, you also brought up STAR, and it's funny, I was looking at, so I kind of calculated the ones that we've done so far at least once or twice in the company, and it's about a dozen of the LSs, which is a decent number. And then I've worked through all the workshops and all this stuff together the last 2-3 years that have been online, and then the ones that were in person before that for on and off for almost a year. And I've done about twice that many, about 25 of them, 26. STAR's one I haven't done. I realized that, and I realized it like a year ago, and I just had forgotten about it, and because it was one I wanted to do because it seemed pretty interesting. So that could be the basis of maybe a session, Jeremy, at some point that you do, just because my guess is, like most people, there's this, let's say, easier dozen to 2 dozen, most of us do, and then sort of we string together in variant forms most of those same dozen to 2 dozen, and then that's it, right? And then there's these oddball ones out there, and we're all in that, oh yeah, I forgot that, oh yeah, I forgot that, and then we're in the I forgot that group, and you know that's probably a Pareto distribution anyways, and so you know that could be an interesting thing for us to sort of go through, because I do think it's interesting. I mean, it looks really, really powerful, actually, in some ways.
Yeah, it's
especially in
terrifyingly
some ways,
simple.
especially when you feed it. I was thinking this more than anything else is like if you feed it with the EcoCycle planning, I mean, it's sort of like it's sort of like a supernova. You know what I mean? Like everyone might just quit, right? It's just like, or whatever, right? It's just because you realize the totality of it, But anyway, so I don't know what you think about that.
And give it a try. See what the fuck happens, man. That's the way
Yeah.
it goes.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm gonna go scoop up the kids, gentlemen. Thank you guys
No,
for
thanks.
hanging out and
This was great.
and feeding us with something to think about. And
Yeah.
this has been the July 25th Wise Crowds Design Call. And,
Now,
I'll see
by
you
the
guys
way,
in the
what's
next
your
one.
schedule in August? Are you going to do the full Dutch thing and bail, or what are you doing?
I might. I would love. So, are you volunteering to host this call? Is that
No,
what I'm? Okay.
I was just
that what I
wondering
hear?
what you were doing. I'm not ready to take that leap yet, but I should
we'll
be.
see.
But I'm not.
We will see. I think
Okay.
there's based on last week. Last week I was unable to get to the call, so I think there will be a call to community to see if anybody's willing to step up and host. And
Okay.
we might take a few weeks off, but
Okay.
it'll be
Cool.
on the calendar.
Sure. Well, thanks so much, Jeremy. Thanks, Robert and Sam and everybody else. Appreciate it. Thanks for
Yeah,
the
thank you
help
so much.
today.
It
Yes.
was really
Yep.
helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
Good,
Bye-bye, guys.
High five.
Bye.
good day, guys.
Yep. There you go.